So let's talk a little bit about the different types of exams or holds, and then exams after that. So there's a few different types of holds. I'm not going to say that these are every single type of hold, but these are the most common ones. You've got a manifest hold, which is a very common one. That's kind of just a generic hold. They put a hold on the entire container. They're just checking out some of the documentation. They want to make sure that everything is documented correctly. Commercial enforcement hold, that's usually going to be things along the lines of trademarks, copyright, things like that. That's going to be a red flag for customs. So if you're bringing in something that has Nike on it, they're going to look at that and make sure that you have the right to use that Nike name brand on the goods that you're bringing in, because counterfeit is a big problem with customs, and it's one of the things that they police.
And Nike pays, or any other company pays to have their trademark and copyright enforced by customs too. So they're just doing what they're supposed to do.
Contraband enforcement team, you see there below the AT set hold. The AT there stands for anti-terrorism, and then contraband enforcement team. There's obviously, this is going to be more common from those countries that don't have, a great political situation, don't have a great relationship with the U.S. That's something that tends to be put on those shipments, and it's just customs wanting to make sure that everything is above board on those with regards to making sure that everything on there is safe. There's nothing in there that's going to harm the U.S., whether intentionally or otherwise. It doesn't necessarily mean that they think there's a bomb on there, but it means that they have reason to suspect that things from that country require an extra eye before they allow them into the U.S. Statistical validation hold. We don't see this one too often because there's actually a process within the entry summary that tells us that there's a statistical reporting issue. But this is something along the lines of, if you've got a census error, let's say you're importing something that what's called the statistical quantity is NO for number. So customs wants to know how many of that item are coming in, and you're importing $1 million worth of those, and you report that you're bringing in 5 of them. Those 5 things are very expensive, and it's outside the historical reporting for that item. That's the sort of thing that we would see a statistical validation hold on, because they're thinking that you've probably not classified that correct if that information you've reported is right. And then the next one is kind of a group, but PGA holds. So a USDA or APHIS hold, Fish and Wildlife, FDA, CPSC, EPA, those are actually usually going to be separate from actual customs exam holds. Those are usually going to be on what's called the PGA line. So for FDA, let's say we submitted FDA information and our entry came back with a customs release, but what we see is that we have what's called an FDA hold intact message. That means that some of the data that you transmitted, whether it's the documentation, whether it's the FDA information itself, has flagged FDA to take another look at that. And FDA wants to make sure that you're not delivering those goods, make sure you're not putting them into the commerce of the US before FDA says, yes, we're good. And then once you go through that exam, you'll get what's called an FDA may proceed message, or a USDA may proceed message, which means exactly what it sounds like. You can go ahead with that shipment. They've found everything to be above board. In terms of actual exam types, there's about 4. The most basic one is vehicle and cargo inspection system, called a VACUS exam. We refer to it usually as an X-ray exam. It's the simplest, it's the quickest, and most importantly, it's the cheapest.
Yes.
So
it's the least intrusive of all of the exams, and it goes pretty quick. It usually goes pretty quick, depending on what port you're in and what kind of volume they have. Yeah. The next one in line is a tailgate exam, and it is an intrusive exam. They do open up the doors, and they pull out something on the rear of the container, open it up, and if they're satisfied with that, then they seal it back up, close the doors, and off they go.
Next up, you got the intensive exam. This is the one that really starts hurting. This is the one that causes the delays and the additional fees usually. The intensive exam means that they've done more than that tailgate exam. Whether it was that initial tailgate exam yielded something that made them want to take another look, or if they skipped the tailgate exam and they just said, hey, this is a commodity that we want to take a really good look at. We're going to flag this. We're going to open up the container. They may go so far as to unload the entire container, open up boxes, take samples. This one really has a broad view in terms of what they could possibly do with the exam. So that we'll talk about that a little specifically here in a minute. PGA exams, that's going to be things for your USDA and APHIS, your Fish and Wildlife FDA. Most of those are done through ACE, the Automated Commercial Environment. So your broker will get a message back from their system saying that that organization wants to take a look. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold here, sorry. You will usually get a message through ACE that says, you know, FDA wants to take a look at this. That's when you'll get a hold intact message. That's when you will see FDA will want information in what's called ITACs, where you have to go on and upload documentation to that particular customs entry so the FDA can take a look, and it will have to deliver to a facility where FDA can actually access that product and open it up and take a look at what they want to take a look at.
Now, typically the broker will do all that on behalf of the importer, correct?
Yes, when necessary. Some of these things, so like a VACUS exam, that happens automatically if it's flagged. You know, all of that gets taken care of at the port. Usually the broker doesn't have to do anything. No truckers have to be called to get anything moved. The more intrusive your exam, the more likely it is that either your forwarder or your broker, whoever you decide to have handle that, usually that's when you have to get in and get your hands dirty and say, hey, you need to get a trucker, move it to this exam site, get all the fees paid, and then move it back to the port.
Okay, so before we move forward, I know that you guys might get a little bit more specific on each exam. You have answered a lot of those questions on this slide. So I'm going to go ahead and ask some other questions that have been asked. One is, are customs exams per container or per bill of lading? And if it's per bill of lading, do all the containers on that bill of lading get examined?
Usually it's by container. I mean, if there's one container on one bill of lading, the answer is yes, it's both. But I have personally seen where one particular container on a bill of lading gets called for an exam. The downside is that usually what that means is that none of those containers, if they're scheduled to move inland, do move inland. They sit at the port, they don't move on the rail, they can collect demurrage while you wait for the exam on that one single container. So they're only going to examine that one container or two containers out of 5, however many. But what ends up happening is it does actually hold up all of the containers on that bill of lading.
Okay, and then what happens if one of those containers or the goods inside during an intensive exam are damaged? Can CBP be held liable for those damages?
It's a very difficult situation. If it is damaged by customs, the only way that you can reconcile that with customs is through a Congressional Tork. And that means getting your congressman involved, getting him to write letters. So it's very, very difficult, very time consuming, and very negative, you know. So the answer is yes, but I've only seen it done once in my 40-year career.
Thank you. All right, well, let's move forward.